Hello, I'm Claudia Sarrico from the Global Science Forum at the OECD, and today I'm talking to you about the precarity of research careers and how it affects women. So at the OECD, I manage a project on reducing the precarity of research careers. And first of all, I'm going to tell you a bit about it and then how it relates to women in research. So the Research Precarity Project, terms of references, starts with the motivation for countries to look at this issue. And countries are worried about the deterioration of the working conditions of researchers, about diversity issues, including gender balance, equal opportunity issues, and also the attractiveness of the career to the best national and international talent. There's a number of challenges in relation to the research precariat. A lot of the funding for science is project-based, which is leading to an increase in fixed-term contracts. There's also an emphasis on short-term output when evaluating research, things like number of publications and publications in highly cited journals, citations, and so on. There's also an increasing number of doctorate holders in most OECD countries, which combined to the previous challenges leads to a heightening of competition in research environments. This has also led some countries to think about the doctorate as preparing doctorate holders not just for research careers, but for diverse careers. But all of this raises the question of the effects on long-term quality of science. So countries are worried about this issue and how it affects the quality of science in the long term. Of course, there are counter-arguments. There's some reason why countries have introduced project-based funding, why they have tried to increase competition. The idea was precisely to improve the quality of science. So there needs to be a balance between that and the effects produced by the increase in the number of people considered in the research precariat. So the focus of the project is on this, the research precariat, and this is defined as the population of researchers with a doctoral degree that hold temporary positions without any commitment to renew their positions or transform those positions into long-term or permanent contracts. We did a policy priority survey among participating countries in the project, and of course different countries have different priorities. Nonetheless, there's a stronger emphasis on the majority of countries on providing decent postdoctoral positions, on the transition from postdoctoral position to open-ended position, on intersectoral mobility between higher education sector, the business enterprise sector, and the private not-for-profit sector, on international mobility, and also on recruitment policies. Now, what is the context for this project? We know that there's been changes in research work. There's been also funding constraints, and with the pandemic, there's also an increasing worry about these in the immediate future. There's also increased funding uncertainty. So there's more and more a shift from core-based funding to project-based funding, which exacerbates research competition between institutions and between researchers. There's also a global market for researchers. Researchers move around in search of better opportunities, but also institutions recruit internationally. And all of this has given rise to non-standard employment and the emergence, as I've said before, of the research precariat. This is also exacerbated by the longevity of research careers in some systems, which makes less positions available for young and early career researchers. The increased pool of doctorate holders, on the other hand, increases the number of early career researchers looking for a permanent position, which also leads to a stratification in research careers, with a few principal investigators having the autonomy and the standard employment to do independent research, and a basis of an increased pool of early career researchers and that find it hard to get a permanent position. So this leads to a number of policy concerns among countries, the deterioration of working conditions, also the lack of diversity in terms of gender, but also in terms of traditionally disadvantaged groups in society, equal opportunities in access to the career, but also in advancement in the career, and generally an issue with the attractiveness of academic research career to national and international talent. So the worry is that the deterioration conditions will make, in the long run, the academic career less attractive. And there's already some evidence of that in some systems. So our main policy question in the project is how to promote better management of academic research careers, to promote inclusion and diversity, to increase the quality of science, but also ultimately to improve the well-being of researchers, all of these combined. As I said, the object of the focus is on the research precariat. So we know, and we have here, that research systems are governed in different ways. There are different traditions. There's the Humboldtian model of academic self-government, traditional of countries like, for instance, Germany and Switzerland, the Napoleonic state-steer tradition, characteristic of countries such as France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, the Anglo-Saxon model with a stronger role for market or quasi-market steering mechanisms that is visible, for instance, in countries like the UK and Australia, and the Confucian model with a strong state steering and control and high investment in applied research that is more characteristic of some Asian countries. So we know that countries are different, but all of them are facing these issues. Obviously, how they deal with it might be different, but the policy areas that we're looking at is the stock and flow of doctorate holders, the recruitment practices, the staff profile in terms of age, gender, also the position in the academic career from assistant professor, associate professor to full professor, for instance, the employment status, so those with civil service status, with permanent contracts, open contracts, but also those on fixed-term contracts with the prospect of an open-ended position, such as those on tenure track, but also, of course, those on fixed-term contracts with no prospect of progressing. We're looking at staff appraisal, promotion, remuneration, also professional development and mobility, international mobility, but also intersectoral mobility. And in the countries that we work with, we look at the policy areas, we look also at the policies they are implementing or planning to implement to address the issues. And we look at the policy design in terms of regulatory levers such as legislation, funding levers, informational levers such as, for instance, career doctorate holder surveys to track the career of doctorate holders in the countries and how they progress in the career. Organizational levers as well, such as, for instance, observatory of research careers, or coordinating bodies that bring stakeholders to address issues. And then policy implementation. So we look at the policy officials, the research agencies, also the research performing organizations such as higher education institutions and public research organizations, and researchers themselves. And of course, any evidence of policy evaluation, which gives us information about the effectiveness of any implemented policies. And of course, all these policies, their intended outcomes are to produce improved well-being of postdoctoral researchers, more inclusive and diverse research systems, and better quality of science. So we're using these analytical framework to study the issue of reducing the precarity of research careers in different OECD countries, so that countries learn from each other on what works, what doesn't work, and how they can address the issue. The way we're doing this is through policy surveys. We invite countries to produce country notes where they describe their national context, their recent policy initiatives, including, of course, now emerging policies relating to COVID-19, their main policy concerns, and any available national evidence they possess. Now then, we have produced already these country notes, and based on these, we have moved to a stage of policy interviews with different stakeholders, and I can go back and tell you that we're interviewing in countries three main types of stakeholders: policy officials and research funding agencies, research performing organizations, and representative associations of researchers, especially postdoctoral researchers. And so what we want to do with these policy interviews is to gather the perceptions of different stakeholders on the recent, existing, and planned policies, including COVID-19, information on the policy process in terms of the policy design, the policy implementation, the policy evaluation, any observed effects of the policies on what we want to address, such as the well-being of researchers, the inclusiveness and diversity of research systems, and the quality of science. And then, most importantly, for us to be able to provide policy analysis and advice and recommendation to countries on the factors that are enablers and barriers to the effectiveness of the existing policies on reducing the precarity of research careers. Now, we have already some preliminary findings with potential impact on women researchers. These are just preliminary because the project will go on. We will have an international workshop on the 26th and 27th of November to discuss the findings. And the policy report will be published as an OECD publication at the beginning of 2021. So in terms of the regulatory levers, we can see some countries adopting mandatory open recruitment of postdoctoral researchers rather than principal researchers just appointing their own postdoctoral researchers or the people they know. Some funding levers regarding funding to improve the participation of women in research careers, funding for programs to support equality, diversity, and inclusion in general. Informational levers as well, such as the collection, analysis, and publication of data on doctoral and postdoctoral researchers disaggregated by gender. And of course, surveys of doctoral holders to track the career trajectory and working conditions of postdoctoral researchers. We also see some countries adopting organizational levers, and I would like to highlight, for instance, the Concordat to support the career development of researchers, such as that of the UK, but also there's also a European initiative at this level. So now I would like to move on to some work that I did with a colleague of mine on reducing the gender gap in research careers. And we've published this blog piece called "It's Time to Close the Gender Gap in Research." This is by Michela Bello and myself. And this is based on the OECD International Survey of Scientific Authors. And we do have some interesting findings on women researchers. Now, we know that women are underrepresented in research careers, and on average across OECD countries, women are only around 40% of all researchers. They are considerably less likely to be in leadership positions, and only 30% of corresponding authors are women. Women researchers may have less opportunity to both enter and advance in their fields, and the magnitude of this gender gap varies significantly across fields of research, as you can see from this graph. So the women scientific authors by field of research, if we look at the percentage of social science and psychology, for instance, there's near parity. But if we look at physics and astronomy, only 15% of corresponding authors are women in physics and astronomy. So there's a big difference between different subjects. So women researchers as well, according to the survey, earn less, which is not news, of course, despite parity in the quality of their research. And that is the most important factor to highlight. So although women authors earn on average 5 to 6% less than their male counterparts, even after accounting for individual and job-related characteristics, the gender wage gap is particularly wide in engineering and computer sciences, nearly 27%, and also in senior management positions, around 15%. And women are at a greater disadvantage in fields associated with more prestige and better pay. However, the work of male authors is not more likely to be cited or be published in prestigious journals than that of female authors. Women authors also tend to be less mobile than men are, and these may preclude them having some better opportunities. Around 24% of male authors live in a country that is different from where they attain their highest degree, compared to only 18% of women. Now, if we look at the estimated differences of research quality and earnings between female and male scientific authors, we see that there's no significant difference between the average number of field normalized citations or the journal prestige where their work is published. There is, of course, and the graph is very explicit about that, there is a significant difference between their incomes. And I would like to stress again that this is controlling for individual and job-related characteristics. Now, women appear to face greater challenges in attaining leadership roles. Now, 80% of female corresponding authors and 85% of male corresponding authors hold a doctorate degree. So they are considered really independent researchers. Yet nearly 15% of female corresponding authors are in a subordinate relationship to a senior researcher, compared to just 8% of male researchers. So almost double of female corresponding authors are in a subordinate relationship relative to male researchers. There's also some interesting information on gender differences on the use of digital tools. Women authors appear less likely to seize opportunities brought about digitalization. They are less likely to use advanced digital tools or share data and code. However, they are more likely to engage in activities aimed at building and maintaining their digital identity and to communicate information about their work online. Women need to put more effort into having their work recognized. Men typically get more credit for co-authored papers in tenured decisions. We see this from the available literature. As well, women are held to higher standards when seeking to have their papers published in top journals. We know this from the literature, and these may be some of the reasons why women feel the need to put more effort into having their work recognized. So gender parity is being achieved at the doctoral level. It's when women advance in the career that things start to diverge. So countries need to make systemic changes in academic structures and institutions to address gender issues and keep the momentum to track and evaluate the results of the range of actions and policies to achieve gender equality in science. If countries fail to remedy gender discrepancies, they risk wasting considerable talent that could have otherwise made valuable contributions to their research systems, and knowledge production itself becomes inherently gender biased. Science needs a turning point. So in the 1970s and 1980s, many orchestras began using blind auditions in an effort to mitigate any gender-related biases among judges. The experiment marked a turning point for female musicians as the percentage of women in orchestras increased dramatically. Science today needs a similar turning point to eliminate systemic bias against women, and it may take similarly bold ideas to get there. So at the OECD, we're looking at some of these issues, and you can follow us on the webpage, on the research, on the precarity of research careers. You have the address there, and here this is a way that we disseminate the project more widely. It's being continuously updated, and it has links to blog posts by OECD authors, but also by experts in different countries around the OECD. And I invite you to discuss these issues with us. It's a bit difficult these days doing these meetings virtually with pre-recorded presentations, but I welcome that you contact me and us at the OECD to further discuss these issues. Thank you very much for listening. Here is my email. Keep in touch. Also read our blog and let me know what you think. Thank you. Bye-bye.